Yes, and who doesn't know how to do dispute property tax appraisals? Well, this gentleman's going to tell us how to do it. You ready, Mr. OConner? Come on up. I'm getting out of your way.
Let's see, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, sir.
Anthony, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, when you're dealing with property taxes, it's really pretty straightforward. There's two rules to dealing with property taxes. And you may have heard of this guy out of Omaha named Buffett. And he has two rules to investing. His first rule is don't lose any money. The second rule is refer to rule number 1.
Right.
OConner's rule of property tax protesting are fairly similar. The first rule is protest every property every year to the proper level. Rule number 2 is see rule number 1. So I was talking with Will before, and he goes, I protest every property every year. And that's what you need to do if you want to minimize your property taxes, because the process is arbitrary. The issue is you get people involved, and people are not homogeneous. I mean, you look around this room, we're not all exactly alike. We're different ages, different colors, some of us have hair, some of us have gray hair, some of us have black hair. You know, we're all different. So we talked about the two rules. Rule number 1 is protest every property every year. And I can't overemphasize that. The property tax protest is iterative. The reductions you get in 1 year carry forward to the next year. And then secondly, the process is arbitrary. Sometimes you'll show up and you'll have no evidence or no meaningful evidence, and you'll get more of a reduction than you're entitled to. In other years, you'll show up and you go, boy, I really don't have anything, but I'll just show up and see if I can make friends with the appraiser, and you're just amazed at what you get. So the process is not entirely logical. As a point of interest, the Texas school finance has been ruled unconstitutional for the 3rd or 4th time. A judge in Austin ruled it unconstitutional, and there will be the Supreme Court of Texas is expected to rule on it this summer. So we may well have a special session on redoing how we fund school property taxes here in Texas. Here's the price of oil. Does anyone in here work in the oil industry or affected by the oil industry in any way? Yeah, quite a few hands. Now, for those of you who are under or who are over about 40, you will realize that when the price of oil goes down, that is not a good thing for Houston. People like to talk about we've diversified, and it's true that we did diversify from 80% oil base economy to 50%, and then we eventually got down to 48%. But as we gained 90,000 jobs in the in the energy sector between 2009 and 2014, we're back up to 54% energy for the base economy. Now, I was sort of proud of myself that I was able to do this PowerPoint, and as I was going through looking at the different colors and so forth, I figured, what's a good color? And I thought, gray. Gray's the perfect color for property taxes because we love things that are subjective. There's nothing definite in property taxes. The only thing that's definite is that they're too high. Does anyone know how you can tell if your property taxes are too high? If you pay taxes. If you're not exempt, your property taxes are too high. Value is subjective. If Will and I were to look at a house, we'd come up with a different value. It's not that he's right or I'm right, it's just that we look at it differently. And for property taxes, you can appeal on both market value everyone understands what market value is? Willing buyer, willing seller, reasonable exposure to the market, just a normal sale of a house. And how many people know what unequal appraisal is? Oh my. Okay, good. Unequal appraisal, I think, is unique to Texas in terms of property tax appeals. I'm not familiar with another state that allows appeals on unequal appraisal. And unequal appraisal is simply saying that I'm taxed unfairly compared to similar properties. So let's take an example. One of our clients owns an apartment project in Northborough, and it was assessed for $4 million. And then they bought it for $8 million, and the people at HCAD realized this property is worth $8 million, so they increased the value to $8 million. Yet on a per unit basis, all the other properties in the area are assessed at the equivalent of $4 to $5 million. So at the end of the day, this property owner is going to prevail, and the value will be reduced to about $4 to $5 million. If you're familiar with the sale of the Astroworld land, I think it sold for $75 million, and it was reduced to something like $37 or $40 million in the hearing, and then I think it was reduced to $25 million at the lawsuit stage. And why was something reduced by 60% from its actual sales price? Because it was unequally appraised. All the other properties were assessed at the equivalent of the $25 or $30 million. So unequal appraisal is a great option, and to my knowledge, Texas is the only state that allows unequal appraisal. What properties are comparable for unequal appraisal? It's somewhat gray, but generally speaking, you want to use properties that are similar in location and general characteristics. Now, there's not a whole lot of news here. I don't know if you can read this, but in 11, 12, 13, and 14, we gained 83,000, 119,000, 90,000, and 105,000 jobs. So the Houston economy has been on fire. The U.S. economy is growing at about 1.5% per year. We're going at about 2.5%, or we were going at about 2.5% that pace at 3.8% per year. So more than double the national rate. Is there anyone in here who last year in March or April thought, I know what's going to happen is the price of oil is going to drop from $110 to $50. Is there anyone who knew that was going to happen? No. I didn't. This time last year I was going, what could go wrong? Things are going so well. Duh, the price of oil could fall. So that's what happened. And in Houston, we are very heavily dependent on the price of oil. When you read in the paper the Chamber of Commerce saying, oh, we're diversified, we're no longer dependent on the price of oil, that's not accurate. I went through this earlier. I won't go through it in a lot of detail just because of the time limitations, but we gained, there's a primary economy, which are people who do work that contribute, that's exported outside the area. So oil and gas, manufacturing, software production, and then there's the service jobs, the secondary economy, real estate, fast food, other types of services, house cleaning, painting, construction. All those serve the local economy. And there's 4.3 secondary jobs for every primary job. We gained 70,000 jobs in the Houston metro area between 2009 and 2014. Now, I'm not here to tell you we're going to lose all 70,000 of those jobs. I don't know if the price of oil is going to be $20 3 months from now or $100 3 months from now. I don't know. If I knew that, I'd just be off trading in the Bahamas, sitting on a 120-foot yacht instead of talking right here. So I don't know what's going to happen, but in a bad case scenario, if we lose those 70,000 jobs we gained, we're not losing 70,000 jobs, we're losing 370,000 jobs out of about 2.9 million jobs. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if we lose about 12% of the jobs in the local economy, that's going to sting. I think it is accurate to tell you that the increases we have seen in home prices in the last 4 or 5 years are the highest inflation-adjusted prices that we have seen in the last 50 years. Granted, during the 1970s, when we had inflation, we did have prices going up at 8 and 10% per year, but inflation, that was due to primarily inflation. And inflation nationally has only been about 1.5%, 1% or so, and we have seen the price of Houston houses go up 31% in a 3-year period. And so if you take away inflation, that's maybe 28% or 9% per year. So this is the best run for houses that we have seen in at least 50 years. And the reason is Houston can grow in 4 directions. We're not constrained, and we're also fairly conservative in terms of our building policies. I remember someone talking about going to another county and they're saying, well, what are the building requirements here? And they say, well, the only requirement we have is that you don't build on your neighbor's land. Well, it's not quite that good in Harris County and in the city of Houston, but you can get a building permit pretty quickly here. People complain about it. We worked on a case on the Pacific Coast. It took someone 25 years and $50 million to get a permit for a hotel. 25 years to get a building permit. Here you get it in 6 to 12 months. It moves very quickly. So historically, that has kept the price of housing down, or the increases in value down. Now, can you see those numbers or not really? These are the percentages of increases in value by Harris County Appraisal District. If you own a house valued at less than $80,000, congratulations, they only increase the price 13.5% on average. If you own a house valued at $150,000 or over $80,000 to $1 million, they increase the price about 16 to 20% for existing houses in 1 year. Values were up 11% last year. HCAD raised values 15 to 20% this year. Am I the only one who has trouble seeing 11% versus 15 to 20%? Seems like they might have overshot a little bit. Who's familiar with the 10% cap? Okay, I'm going to go through. There's a number of people. Are you not raising your hand because you don't want to bother, or you're not familiar with it? Okay, let me go through it fairly quickly. In Texas, for your homestead, there are 2 great protections. One is if you live on a $10 million house on River Oaks Boulevard, a creditor can never take that house from you except for a mortgage creditor or property taxes or for a mechanic's lien. But otherwise, they can't take your homestead. Likewise, for your homestead, you get special tax privileges. And one of those privileges, they can't raise the value that you're taxed on more than 10% in 1 year. So this gets slightly complicated. It's not complicated really, but we have what's called appraised value, which I'm going to call appraised value / taxable value. And that's the amount you pay taxes on. And then we have market value, and that's the value that the appraisal district says your house is worth. Theoretically, it's the value of your house, but for our purposes, it's the value that the appraisal district says your house is worth. So the appraisal district can increase the market value of your house without limit. So you saw those increases of 15 and 20%. Well, they're allowed to do that, but if you have a homestead, they can only increase the value of your homestead by 10% per year. But it will keep increasing by 10% per year until it catches up with the market value. Now, in Texas, this is only for your homestead. It doesn't apply to rental properties, and it doesn't apply to investment properties, commercial, land, apartments, anything. It's only for your homestead, and a couple may only have one homestead.
You have a question?
Yeah, what if you're over 65? Do you get additional protection?
The question is, if you're over 65, do you get additional protection? And the answer is yes. It comes in a couple of ways. The first, and perhaps most important, is it freezes your school taxes. So unless you improve your house, your school taxes, the amount you pay in school taxes will never go up. If you live to be 100 and your house goes up from $200,000 to $2 million in value, you will still be paying the same amount of school taxes when you die as when you were turned 65. So when you turn 65, you really need to fight hard to get that value as low as possible. The second value of an over 65 exemption is that there are higher exemptions with many entities. And it varies from area to area, but what I can tell you is for Harris County, there is an over 65 homestead exemption of $160,000. So if you live in a house that's worth $150,000, you do not pay any Harris County taxes. Your school taxes are frozen, and if you're in the city of Houston, there's a $90,000 exemption. So it freezes the school taxes, and in most parts of the state, you get a higher exemption than you would if you were under 65. One point that is not intuitive is the 10% cap does not apply until your third year of ownership. You can't get a homestead exemption unless you own the house and live in the house on January 1st. If you buy a house on June 30th, you don't own it and live in it on January 1st. The next January 1st, you can get the homestead exemption, and the 10% cap applies the first year after you get the homestead exemption. So you have the 10% cap. The cap can be increased for remodeling or expanding the house. So if you go through and you actually pull permits to redo your kitchens and bathrooms, they will raise your taxes. But if they don't know that you've enhanced the house, they won't raise your taxes. And by the way, if anyone wants a copy of the slides, just give me a card afterwards, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the slides. But your 10% cap won't be raised for maintenance, such as replacing a roof or replacing an HVAC. Those are considered maintenance. So redoing a kitchen or redoing a bathroom with granite would be considered remodeling, or adding on to the house would be considered remodeling, and they can increase the house by the increment in value of the construction, which may not be the same as the cost of doing the construction. Cost does not always equal value. So an example here, your house was valued at $200,000 in 2014. They raised the value to $280,000 for market value. That's what HCAD is saying it's worth, or whatever appraisal district. They can raise your taxable value to $220,000, 110% of $200,000 in 2015. And if that value stays at $280,000, they can raise it another 10% to $242,000 in 2016. So it can keep going up 10% per year until it gets to the market value. So one thing that upset some people is they go and protest their house, and it went from $200,000 to $280,000, and they're successful in the protest, and then they reduced it to $260,000 in 2015. Do they reduce the property taxes they pay in 2015? The answer is no. They'd have to reduce it below $220,000 to reduce the amount of taxes they pay. There are 4 types of disability or exemptions. You have the regular, you've got the over 65, which we talked about. You've got the platinum disability, the 100% disabled military disability. You pay no property taxes. If you own that $10 million house on River Oaks, you do not pay property taxes. If you are a veteran who is 100% disabled as a result of a military incident. There are lesser military disabilities. Frankly, they're not very meaningful, but the one that is meaningful is if you're 100% disabled, you do not pay property taxes as a vet. And then finally, if you're disabled for other reasons, it's essentially the equivalent of an over 65 exemption. Here are the percentage of parcels that increased by value range. If you can't read it, let me just tell you that about 95% of everything that's over $80,000 in value went up. Only 90% of the ones from 80 to 149, 95% of everything over 150,000 went up. We're talking houses, and only 59% of the ones under 80,000 went up. So overall, for existing houses, 87% of all houses in Harris County had an increase in value. How many people realize that there is a 2-tier system in Texas that houses are taxed at 100%, commercial is taxed at 70%? Anyone aware of that? The reality is your home, HCAD's values this year are right at about 100% of market value. We do a ratio study every year where we compare assessed values to market values. And in Harris County, commercial property is assessed at about 70%. If you own commercial property in Montgomery, you get a special deal. It's assessed at 47%, less than half of market value. One of the things we're doing is a number of what we call ratio study suits, where we are appealing at the judicial appeal level that our clients' taxes are too high because even though they're assessed at 100% of market value, commercial property is assessed at 70% of market value. So we have suits like this going on in about either 5 or 6 counties. And a total of about 2,000 different suits, and we're expecting to get to trial on some of them in 2 to 6 months. The commercial overview, how many people own commercial? If you own commercial, the short version is it increased by 20% this year, give or take. If you appeal, you should be able to get that value down to 3 to 7% increase. And to do that, you need to appeal, unless you get fortunate and you get a reduction down to near last year's level at the informal, which you can probably do in most surrounding appraisal districts, Fort Bend, Montgomery, Brazoria, Galveston, you can probably get back close to last year's value. In Harris County, we only settle about 10 to 20% of our commercial accounts informally. In those other counties, we settle 90 to 99% of them informally. So if you're in Harris County, you're probably going to go to the board. And then if you want to get your value down to a reasonable level, you should file either a judicial appeal for binding arbitration or what's called SOA, State Office of Administrative Hearings. And you can do binding arbitration on commercial up to $1 million. You can do the SOA hearings, which is a state judge that's not tied to the appraisal district, for commercial over $1 million. And you can do a lawsuit in state district court for $400 filing fee. If you own the property personally, you can file pro se, meaning acting as your own attorney. And that may sound really way out there, But if you just go to the Chris Daniels website and search for cases where Harris County Appraisal District is the defendant, you can find lawsuits that other people have filed, print one out, fill in your name and your account number, file it, and they'll call you and settle. You think I'm joking? HCAD raised land values 25%. And I think the reality is, from what I have heard, these interloop tracts of land where people were building high-density property, especially apartments, are probably down 40 to 50% in value from the end of last year. There's just no buyers. No one is buying land to build high-rise or mid-rise apartments now. So for vacant land alone, a 25% increase from $9.5 billion to $11.9 billion in Harris County. The appeal process, the effective date is January 1st, and that's troublesome this year because the reality is that residential values had not started to tank on January 1st. And there's just beginning to be some evidence that the residential market is softening. But the reality is, on January 1st, we have a strong residential market. The notices of value are sent by the appraisal district during March to May, and they're required to send a notice if the value goes up by more than $1,000. You can protest if the value stays the same, goes up, or goes down. How often should you protest? And how many properties should you protest every year? All of them. Yes, excellent. The hearings are in the summer. We've started some hearings already. Hearings will go from roughly May through October. Most appraisal districts finish up sooner than that. Harris County will probably not finish until October, November. Lawsuits are filed. You have 60 days after you get the ARB notice to file the lawsuit. So remember, go to Chris Daniels' website, the Harris County District Clerk, Chris Daniels. Search for a defendant, Harris County Appraisal District. Print out the lawsuit, retype it, put in your name and your property, pay the $400 filing fee, and someone will call you and go, well, what do you want to settle this thing? I'm not giving legal advice. I'm not an attorney. I'm just telling you what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so two appeal options, market value and what's unequal appraisal?
Yeah.
Yeah, other properties are assessed on, have a more favorable level of assessment. So I gave the example of the apartment project in Northborough where they jacked up the value of this one property from about $4 million to $8 million and left all the others in the area in the range at the equivalent of $4 to $5 million. So and when you file your appeal, there's a form, and you need to check the box for market value and check the box for unequal appraisal. If you don't check the box for unequal appraisal and you put together this beautiful PowerPoint presentation that's color tab indexed and everything, and you go in and give your presentation on unequal appraisal, they'll go, oh, we're so sorry, but you didn't check the box on unequal appraisal. It's a real shame. We can't consider your appeal on unequal appraisal, but you check the box next year and come back, and we'll be glad to listen to your appeal on unequal appraisal.
You're basically saying check both boxes.
Yeah, check both boxes. Check all the boxes. It doesn't hurt. We also fill out a box for 4141A9, which is any other actions of the chief appraiser of the appraisal district or the ARB that may negatively affect the property owner. So you can't check too many boxes.
What was that number again? 4140 what?
4141A9. It's just a section of the tax code. But it's basically, anything else they do, like, for example, if they say your house is a certain grade and it's wrong, they say it's an A grade quality, but it's really a B grade quality, that may not sound like a lot, but it's probably a 20% difference in value. And it is almost impossible to get HCAD to change things like grade and condition. I mean, it is difficult. So if you're the appraisal district, think of yourself as the appraisal district for a second and think of how this works. They really only deal with 3,000 people for the most part. They have 1.6 million parcels. 1.6 million parcels is in Harris County. Now 80% of the sheep out there are not going to file a protest. So they get rid of 80%. 80% will not file a protest. So basically that's the same as going in and signing off and saying, I agree to the value. So only 335,000 filed a protest last year. So that's 20%, maybe 21% if you really do the math. Now those 335,000, they will get rid of about half of those in the informal. So you've got 3 levels to the appeal process. The informal hearing, the appraisal review board hearing, and the appraisal review board hearing, that's the panel of 3 impartial, independent citizens who are paid by the appraisal district. How many of you could be impartial and independent if you were paid by one of the parties? Dang, that's hard.
Yeah.
So, now if you had to do 335,000 negotiations, and it takes one person to do an informal, and it takes 4 resources, the appraiser, plus 3 ARB members to do a formal hearing, would you try to get rid of some of them at the informal level? Yeah, so you try to do something to get rid of some of them at the informal level, and HCAD gets rid of a little bit less than half at the informal hearing. So then they have 154,000 ARB hearings, and those are the impartial hearings held by the independent citizens. And how many people in here have been to an ARB hearing? Okay, now keep your hand up if you feel that the panels are impartial and independent. No hands up. Were you just scratching your head, or do you think they're independent? Okay, I thought we might have had one here. Thought he might be an ARB member, actually. Now, you've gone through, so the first thing they've done is they put you in a cubicle with someone who will listen to you for 5 or 7 minutes. They've only got 15 minutes to do this informal hearing, so they'll listen to you for 5 or 7 minutes, and if they can, they'll make you an offer. And you either take it or you don't. And if you take it, you're done for the year. If you don't, you can go to the appraisal review board hearing. And so they cut it from 335 to 154. They do the 154, and of those, about 3,000 file a protest or a lawsuit in Harris County every year. So once you file the lawsuit, now they have to listen to you. Up until now, they can make up all this stuff. Like, you can go, well, my house isn't an A grade, it's a B grade. They'll go, well, I'm sorry, sir, but that's what the modeler said, so I can't change that. I don't have authority to change that. Well, can I see the modeler? Well, no, sir, he's not available right now. And you can go, well, how many people in here have ever washed a rental car before they returned it? Has anyone, you washed a rental car? You must have really trashed it bad
Sorry.
Okay, well, he's honest at least. You got to give credit for that.
Yeah.
Now, how many people in here think that rent houses are in just as good a shape as homes that are owner-occupied? How many people in here think that? There's no one here from Harris County Appraisal District then. Is there anyone here from HCAD? I won't make fun of y'all. I'm just going to be honest about how it works. Well, at Harris County Appraisal District and at the ARB, they do not believe there is a difference in the condition of a rental house and an owner-occupied house. Once you file a lawsuit, they have to talk about that difference. They can't pretend that there's no difference anymore. If you bring pictures to the hearing, what are they going to tell you? Has anyone here brought pictures to a hearing at Harris County Appraisal District? And what have they told you?
It doesn't make much difference.
It doesn't? Well, I'll be fair here. Some of the people, there's some good people at Harris County Appraisal District who want to be reasonable and want to resolve the hearings. On the other hand, in my opinion, it's a hostile work environment where people are intimidated to make reasonable adjustments. That's my opinion. I don't have any, just from spending 25 years over there. But they are reluctant
What would he know?
to make reasonable adjustments because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. So if you bring pictures, what you'll sometimes hear, occasionally they'll go, those are good pictures, I can do something with that. But sometimes, more often than not, you'll hear, well, do you have bids to go along with those pictures? And so the next year you go, well, I'm not going to do the pictures, I'm going to do the bids. So you come in with the bids the second year, and what do they say then?
Picture.
Do you have pictures to go along with those bids? And so you go, dadgummit, they got me again. So the next year you go in, and you've got pictures, and you've got bids. And what do they say then? Well, I just wish we had more to go on. And you're laughing, but this actually happens. But if you show up, they do get rid of half of the protests by giving you some adjustment. And property taxes are a big deal in Texas. Most people in Texas pay more in property taxes than they do in federal taxes. Not including Social Security, but most people in Texas pay more in property taxes than they do in federal income taxes. So property taxes are a big deal. And how many of you have gone down to the IRS office and said, yeah, I'm down here and I'd like to negotiate on my federal taxes because of the condition of my employer? So at least you get to negotiate. But once you file the lawsuit, do you think they're really going to tell you that the condition of a rental house is the same as the condition of a owner-occupied house? Now they have to talk to you like you're an adult who actually has an IQ over 20. So, how many people think HCAD uses sales to value houses? How many people think the appraisal district uses the cost approach to value houses? Now, how many of you own houses? Okay, just about everyone. Now, when you bought your house, did you use the cost approach to buy it, figure out how much you were going to offer? Who used the cost approach to value the house before you bought it? Well, that's what HCAD does. That's how they value 900,000 houses in Harris County. They use the cost approach. So, I'm not going to get real technical on you here, but think of one database with information on the property characteristics, such as the land area, the size of the home, the year it was built, the grade, meaning the quality of construction, the condition, whether there are slab issues, whether you have a pool, the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, those types of features. So you've got this, the property characteristics, and then you've got another table with numbers that they apply to those property characteristics. And then someone pushes the button, the big red easy button, 900,000 values come out. That's how they value those houses. They only have about 20 people doing all that work. So that's how the values are done. So, how many people in here think that it is possible for HCAD to have accurate information on 900,000 houses? I don't see any hands. How many people in here, this is where you're supposed to raise your hand. How many people in here believe that the Appraisal Review Board believes that HCAD has accurate data on 900,000 houses? The correct answer is yes. If you go into the Appraisal Review Board and you go, HCAD is showing that this house was not remodeled, but I've got the MLS sheet here, and I've got the color photographs, and this house was remodeled last year, and they did new kitchens, new bathrooms, new wood floors. They did this and they did that. They did everything you could do to this house. You know what they're going to ask you? Well, how do we know your house wasn't remodeled?
Come look at it.
I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't have time to do that. We only have 15 minutes for this hearing. So, they actually believe that all their information is correct. Now, the informal process varies by appraisal district. Harris County is actually better than some. It might be hard to believe, given what I've said, but they do get about half of them resolved. In Fort Bend last year, they decided they would send virtually all of the accounts to the Appraisal Review Board. Anyone have a house in Fort Bend that they appealed last year? Did you go to the ARB or informal?
Informal.
Oh, congratulations. Well, they sent probably 90% of them to the Appraisal Review Board. They resolved about 90% of the commercials informally with about a 20% reduction. So Montgomery and Fort Bend have been difficult. Brazoria and Galveston are generally pretty good to work in. Anyone worked in either Brazoria or Galveston? Have a reasonable experience? Yeah, I mean, they give their appraisers authority to resolve the values, and when people work together, they can get things done. But we probably settle 95% of our single-family accounts in Brazoria County. We probably settled about 30% of them in Harris County. Now, the starting premise in the appeal is that HCAD's records are perfect for 1.6 million properties. And you have the temerity to show up at HCAD's office, the official government office of HCAD, and question the integrity of their data. That is rather bold of you. In fact, that's even sort of offensive that you would show up and suggest that they might have made a mistake. Now, I have a house that's listed on MLS. It is listed for about $145,000. I will consider an offer of $1 for that house. How many people will offer me $1 for that house? Well, I've considered your offer and I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
So if you show up at HCAD with information, they will tell you, oh yes, we'll consider that. They considered it about as much as I considered that offer. So they will consider anything. So if you show up with information that shows their data is incorrect, oh yes, we'll consider that. But not really. Has anyone been to HCAD yet for a property tax hearing?
This year?
This year, yeah. Has anyone heard of a time adjustment? Well, when you go to your hearing in Harris County this year, they're going to have a time adjustment for the sales. So if the sale you're looking at that supports your value sold in January of 2014, they're going to apply a time adjustment to it just to make the math simple. Let's say it sold for $200,000 and they apply a 15% time adjustment for it. They're going to time adjust that value to $230,000. Is the value on December 31st or January 1st. So HCAD only spent 3 days training their appraisers on time adjustments. Only 3 days. So when you show up at HCAD, you can expect that they believe in time adjustments. And they will be using time adjustments, and they're built into their models. So we talked about the premise that rental houses are in equal condition. The starting premise is that you can't really make adjustments on pictures. I mean, because you don't have any bids to go with them. And if you have bids, you really need photos. And if you have both, you'd really like more information to make a proper adjustment. And all of this applies in a world where HCAD is only within 10% of the value half the time. A quarter of the time, they're less than 90%. A quarter of the time, they're more than 110%. And half the time, they're between 90 and 110%. But to listen to their, you'd think their data was scripture, given the credibility they give their data on the properties. And it's sort of like dealing with the IRS. They're not, that may be a little harsh, but what I am trying to say, though, truthfully, is that they start with a premise that they are right, their value is right, and it doesn't matter if they took a value. We have one client who they take his value for a property in the floodway from $50,000 to a couple $1 million every year. And every year, we have to come back and go through litigation to get it back to that $50,000 value. Because maybe Buffalo Bio has moved over by Brenner's and it's no longer in the floodplain. Now, if I seem like I've been a bit harsh here, there are a variety of appraisers at HCAD. I do encourage you to protest. They do resolve about half of them informally, and probably half or more of the ARV hearings generate a reduction. So there is a benefit to appealing, but it's not an even-handed game. However, HCAD must, they absolutely have to resolve a number of these accounts informally. So the more you can encourage your family and friends of friends to protest, the more they're going to have to resolve informally and the more flexible they're going to have to be. I think this may be a record year because this is the first time people have gotten notices that their mortgage payment is being reset for higher property taxes. How many received that notice? Yeah. ARB has become disappointing. There's not much sense that they're impartial, and you can really tell it when you go to a hearing and you have evidence that's on point, and the appraisal district has no evidence, and they still rule in HCAD's favor. And that happens. The only remedy for an outrageous decision is to file suit. Well, you have 3 remedies. You can either do binding arbitration, you can do a SOA appeal, State Office of Administrative Hearings, if it's over $1 million, or you can do a lawsuit in district court. And I told you, just go to Chris Daniels' website, Harris County District Clerk, print out a petition that someone filed against HCAD, have someone retype it for you, pay the filing fee, and they'll be calling you. You need a $15,000 reduction, so if you own 5 rent houses, just put them all in one bundle, and they'll call you and be happy to talk about something reasonable for those properties. So HCAD completely controls the game as long as you're in the informal and the appraisal review board. Even though the appraisal review board is separate and apart, have you heard those terms? Separate and apart from HCAD. They control the game until you get to either a lawsuit, binding arbitration, or SOA. And they count on you being sheep in either not protesting in the first place or not continuing the appeal. Only 3,000 lawsuits are filed annually. So once you file the suit, then they have to deal with you. And this may sound strange that I'm saying this, but I really believe this is the way they look at it. That they get to ignore 80% of the people because they never protest. Of the 335,000 who protested last year, they sit down and they give them a 5 or 7% reduction and they go away. And that's easy enough. They can deal with that. It's not a big hit to the tax base. Of the other 154,000 that go to the ARB, only 2% file a lawsuit. So they're not dealing with 335,000 protests, they're dealing with 3,000 protests. Those are the ones they have to talk to. So I'd encourage you to make it 3,001. Also, as an owner, you can be your own expert witness. So if you own the property in your own name, you don't need an attorney and you don't need an expert witness. As an owner of property, you can be the expert witness as to the value of your property. And our firm files about 1,500 our firm engages counsel to file about 1,500 to 2,000 lawsuits per year. How many think we try more than 10 cases per year? A couple hands. We can try about 4 to 5 cases per year. So you're not going to trial. Unless you're just really being a jackass about it, excuse my language. But, I mean, you are really going to have to reject a very reasonable offer to get to trial if you file a lawsuit against the HCAD to reduce your property taxes. They are going to make an offer to give you an incentive to settle. There's really not any meaningful legislative relief. The most meaningful legislative relief is in the Senate. It would reduce taxes by $2 billion per year. That sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
No, because
It's actually it would reduce property taxes for homeowners by about 4% per year. No relief for commercial owners. And through a higher homestead exemption, it would reduce property taxes for homeowners by about 4% a year. So, but at $2 billion makes for a heck of a good headline. Let's see, I think I'm going to stop here, and I only have about 5 minutes and take questions. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I came in late. Is there a difference between Fort Bend County and, I live in Fort Bend County, and Harris County with Racine or anything?
Technically, no. Practically, yes. Each appraisal, is there a difference between Harris County and Fort Bend in terms of the procedures? Technically, no. There's one property tax code that applies to all counties in Texas, but there's one chief appraiser in each county, and they decide how they're going to play the game. And they don't happen to read the tax code, so they do it however they want to. And in Fort Bend, they used to be very accommodating. In the last couple of years, they've become more and more difficult.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Well, I found in Spring Branch that there's a lot of floodplain issues in Spring Branch, and I take it you've been talking about saving money on our taxes on our personal home. However, on HCAD, what I found was that they don't update their system very quick. I had tried to get a permit in the city of Houston. They said the house, the repairs can't be more than 50% of the value of HCAD. And they valued that house at $78,000, and I'd set my repairs at $45,000. They would not let me pull a permit. So I called Herb Jameson, and Herb said, well, they're not using the 2014 HCAD. On 2014 HCAD, that house is appraised for $94,000. And so I showed that to the city of Houston, and they allowed me to pull my permit. So sometimes, you know, having a better appraisal, if you're rehabbing a house, is in your benefit.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
My question is about the 65 and above, and you said the school district taxes don't go higher after that. Is that the dollar amount or the appraisal value?
Can you?
The question is, when you turn 65, I said the taxes are frozen. And what I mean is that the amount of taxes you pay in dollars is frozen forever unless you remodel or expand your house. The other thing I did not say is it's portable. So if you move from a $100,000 house to a $10 million house, you pay the same percentage of taxes you did on the $100,000 house applies to the $1 million house. So the over 65 is portable if you move after you turn 65. Yes, ma'am.
I bought a house in March of 2014, and the appraisal on the district's website still says pending. It's been over a year.
The question is, you bought a house in March of 2014, and the appraisal district value says pending. And if I had to guess, I would guess that they haven't looked up the price yet because they want it to be at the sales price.
Oh.
So they're not using their model, you know, the easy button. They set yours, set a switch on yours so it wouldn't go with the easy button because they have a, well, there's something called the ratio study that it gets complicated, but they're probably going to get very close to your sales price. Have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
I was into volunteer work. Who are you and who do you represent? And have you noticed since we have a new assessor, that they become more aggressive here in Harris County? And why are you so far with him?
My name is Pat O'Connor. I'm with a company called OConner and Associates. We are 10 times larger in terms of property tax appeals than the second largest company. We do 170,000 appeals per year, including about 100,000 at Harris County. So Harris County just loves us for showing up with 100,000 appeals a year and for filing over 1,000 lawsuits against them each year. And I've been doing, this is part of my business activity, but we've been doing appeals for, I guess actually about 23 years. And we do appeals as a business, and I'm here as a service, you know, trying to explain the process. If you want to, if anyone is interested in hiring someone, you can visit us at cutmytaxes.com or just Google OConner and Associates on the internet. The new assessor is Sam Steeper. I think he is trying to be more reasonable. He's at least willing to meet with me. The old guy wasn't willing to meet with me.
We'll find out if that changes.
Pardon?
That was Sullivan?
Oh, no. It's Sam Steeper. Mike Sullivan is the tax assessor collector. Before that, Don Sumner. Before that, Paul Betancourt. But the chief appraiser was Jim Robinson, and it's now Sam Steeper. And that's the person who sets the values. And the sign says 0, so I think they're about to yank me off the site. So I'll hang around for a bit if anyone has any more questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Patrick O'Connor, everybody. And guys, he has a booth in the room next door for you guys to get more information on using their